We all have these reservoirs of potential. You have greater ability than you imagine that you do. When you are training for an ultra endurance race, it literally strips you down to your core. You meet yourself as you really are, because they really are personal spiritual odysseys. I was somebody who had quite a bit of promise as a young person. Then comes the introduction to alcohol. I had a very unhealthy relationship with this substance. I became quite unwell. I was 50 pounds overweight, semi-depressed, tolerating life. When I was walking up a simple flight of stairs to go to bed one night, I had tightness in my chest and I had to pause. In that moment, it kind of all became very crystal clear to me that I needed to change how I was living. I realized there was one thing that I hadn't tried yet, which was going 100% plant-based. Within a week to 10 days, I really felt fantastic. I was bouncing off the walls, and I felt like I could keep running and keep running. I think the great teachable moments come in the failures. That's your opportunity. Those teachable moments reveal character and show you who you really are.
They say that the human race is doomed, that we have lost touch with our true nature, that the media has corrupted us, and that the planet has no future. I disagree. I believe that humanity is full of hope, and that our salvation lies within each one of us. My name is Brian Rose, and my job is to listen, the oldest method of learning known to man. Each week I seek out individuals that are changing the world, people who are living and thinking in a different way. Their stories will challenge your beliefs, make you question your choices, and perhaps inspire you to change. I never planned on doing any of this, but now I can't stop. Join me on this mission and make humanity something we can all be proud of.
It's time for you to man up, to once and for all tell your mind who the fuck is boss. I need a fucking answer. What's it gonna be? I don't know what it is about this fucking sport, but it attracts people that really need to do deep work on themselves.
I failed in this city. All these bad memories. I never really felt like I gave a fuck about me or my life. I almost killed myself, like.
Think about something that is going to drive you when it really hurts. Some kind of demon you want to fight.
This is not Pussy Man, this is Iron Man. Under pressure reveals true character. What are you gonna do? You gonna be in Chattanooga, May 20th or what?
As you know, I've recently completed my first Ironman race on a 100% plant-based diet. And who did I call when I needed advice and mentoring? Rich Roll, a legend in the community. He started training endurance when he was in his 40s. After a life full of addiction to alcohol and bad food, he ended up becoming an Ultraman, doing double Ironman distances. I love Rich Roll. He's got such an amazing energy and an amazing attitude. He talks about plant-based diets without preaching, and it was a huge honor to have him on the show and talk about his story. It's a deep one, it's a painful one, but it's also who he is today. And I know you're gonna enjoy this. And if you're there sitting on the sofa and you're thinking about an endurance race, well, hopefully Rich, or maybe even me, can inspire you to pull the trigger and do it, or just try eating some of those plants. And inside London Real, we're working on some education of our own. We got the Business Accelerator coming up, the Broadcast Yourself and the Speak to Inspire course. Go to londonreal.tv and also get some of our free courses. And here is a little bit more about it.
London Real doesn't stop when the conversation ends. You see, that's when we get started. Because everything begins with a thought, and then comes the action. The London Real Academy is our global transformation platform. Here we bring together thousands of students from over 75 countries. Whether you want to build a profitable business from your passion, or learn to speak to inspire, or broadcast yourself with your very own podcast, or accelerate your life to become a high-performance person, we have the online accountability course and personal mentoring program that will make your dream a reality. Join us, and we'll take your life to the next level, together. Our next accelerator course is starting soon.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Rich Roll, the American author, public speaker, plant-based nutrition advocate, and vegan ultra-endurance athlete whose Men's Health named as one of the 25 fittest men in the world. You're a former entertainment attorney who transformed into a top finisher in the Ultraman, a 3-day, 320-mile double Ironman distance triathlon, and later raced the Epic 5. I love how that sounds. 5 Ironmen on 5 Hawaiian islands in just over 5 days. You host the wildly popular Rich Roll podcast, and your best-selling memoir, Finding Ultra, now updated and rewritten, tells your inspirational story of addiction, redemption, and optimal health. Rich, welcome to London Real.
Delighted to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me.
It's awesome to have you. You know, you've definitely been in my head the last 6 months on my own journey in endurance, and I want to get to that. But how is London treating you? What's it like being here? How's the food, etc.?
I love it. I live in Los Angeles, a little northwest of the city in a pretty rustic, rural part of town, which is fantastic for training, and the lifestyle is amazing, but I miss that energy, that vitality of being in an urban environment. And I'm staying here in Shoreditch, and it's just fantastic. I've never been to this part of London before, and there's just so much youth and excitement. You can kind of feel it as you walk around. And it's great, you know, that's just something that I don't get on a daily basis. I walked around the neighborhood yesterday afternoon when I got into town, and I think I counted 4 or 5 vegan restaurants in a half-mile radius. So there's something happening here, I think, Brian.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
I love this part of town. Mm-hmm. And how is it here for endurance sports? I mean, is the UK and Europe, are they known as some of the top competitors in the world? Do you remember bumping them into them at ultras and those kinds of things?
Yeah, of course. There's a rich tradition in this part of the world. Last weekend was Roth, which is that's the biggest Ironman race of the year in Germany, aside from Kona. In Britain, you have the Brownlee brothers, and you've got Tim Don, who I know has been on your show. So a rich tradition of British athletes, and I think the culture is alive and well here. But I've never trained here or raced here, so you might know more about that than I do.
Well, I know a little bit about it, and you were a huge inspiration for my recent Ironman 70.3, and we had you on the show for Ironman, and I really appreciate you being there. And it's weird that I found you kind of at this time, because I had heard of you for the past few years, and I watched your podcast and I knew your story, but it wasn't until I met John Joseph, who I know you know as well, that I really started looking more into you. And it happened right around when John was kind of pushing me to go to New York, and I was reading his book, Meat is for Pussies, and you wrote the intro. Mm-hmm. And so I read that, and then for some reason I finally got into your book, and I was listening to the whole thing while at the same time kind of weirdly flirting with this idea of not only doing my first endurance sport, also going 100% plant-based, but then also, facing some of my old addiction issues. And you might have been responsible for stirring a lot of that stuff up at the same time. And so, first of all, I want to thank you for all that, because it was a real big part of the journey for me. But I also wondered if you could maybe tell people, a bit about your journey, because not everyone knows kind of your story and how you even got into ultras. And I know it happened in your 40s, and again, that resonated with me even more. And so,
right.
It was really like the right place at the right time, and I'm kind of glad I didn't meet you earlier, because I might not have taken it as seriously,
I appreciate the kind words, but you did the work, and it's been really fun to kind of watch the journey because, you know, I watched all the Iron Mind episodes. You know, John's one of my best friends in the world, so he hit me up after you guys got together. He's like, yo, Rich, you gotta watch this, what I'm doing with this guy, Brian. You know, and I just got hooked on the series that you created. So it was really fun to watch you prepare for and then compete in that race, and even more than that, to see that you're still totally engaged with your fitness and your nutrition, perhaps even more enthusiastic now than you were prior, which is really cool.
You kind of made an eerie prediction when we were on that Skype call.
Yeah.
You're like, Brian, you're going to go one way or the other.
Right.
You'll either never do this again or you'll get into it, and I think I know which one.
I think you're in the latter. Yeah, you just need to do one more thing, which is sign up for the next race.
That's the thing,
Yeah.
right?
That'll really hook you in.
Yeah. No, you're right. And no, and I appreciate you saying that. And how did you know John? And because you guys are kind of an unlikely couple, like I am with him. But
John is my brother from another mother, and our backgrounds could not be more different. But from the first moment that I met him at like some vegan event in New York City many years ago, and I just connected with him immediately, and we just have become closer and closer and closer over the years. And when I had him on my podcast for the first time, when he told his story like in long form, I was so moved by it. And after that experience, I just felt really connected with him, and we've stayed close ever since.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then when he asked you to write the foreword of the book,
Yeah.
it happened.
Yeah. Well, he said, could you write he's like, could you write a short little paragraph or something like that? And I was like, he doesn't know it, but I'm writing the foreword for this book. And I just, blasted out like this manifesto and just sent it to him. I was like, what do you think of this? And he's like, oh, this is going to be the foreword. And I just wrote the foreword. I just sent him the foreword for his new book that's coming out. I don't know when it's coming out, maybe this winter or maybe this summer, actually, the PMA book.
PMA.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wrote, that was a serious foreword you wrote.
Yeah.
I was like, this guy's not playing around.
Yeah.
Did that take you a while to write that?
I think of all the things that I do, writing is the thing that I do best, and I probably should do more of it. So John's just given me the opportunity to express myself in that way. So yeah, I love the writing.
Yeah, and it really resonates with people.
Yeah.
So, all right, take us back to 39 years old.
39.
So
Okay.
people kind of know why you're even here, because I think like most people listening and watching, they might be in a space right now where you were at, which is, I'm guessing, you can tell me where I'm wrong, but kind of a professional doing work, had some success, maybe not completely fully committed to the work, but it pays the bills, but also kind of forgot about the reason you have a body and why we're eating what we're eating, and just kind of in a weird space that I think a lot of people find themselves around 40 years old.
Yeah, so at 39, I was really on the cusp of achieving everything that I had ever set out to achieve. The American dream being sort of the driving force in my life as far back as I can remember.
Which is what? What is that?
Get the upwardly mobile career that's safe and secure, that's socially approved of, that your parents are happy about. To be earning at a level where you can afford all the toys, and I had a nice sports car in the driveway. I had all the stuff, all the stuff that you're kind of programmed from a very early age growing up in America are the things that you're supposed to be chasing. You're supposed to aspire to the career, study hard, get into the best college, get into the best grad school, get the best job, show up early, work late, impress your job or your boss, move up the corporate ladder, all of that stuff, right? And I just intuited that my entire life without ever sort of stepping back or taking a moment to pause and reflect about what I actually wanted or what actually moved me or what I wanted to express. That was never really part of the equation. And I think implicit in this quest or this search to, achieve this level of social status is this idea that you're going to be happy, that you're going to be fulfilled, that you will find your life purposeful. And for some people that's true, but I think for a lot of people, myself included, it left me feeling not just empty, but really disillusioned with this path that I had chosen for myself, and really hard on myself because I'd never really felt secure enough in my own being to take stock in inventory, or have the courage to seek a different path that might be more attuned to, what I'm here to do. And I think sort of to understand where I was at 39, I have to kind of go back a little bit further. When I was growing up, I grew up in a very education-focused family. Grades were very important, and I was very good at playing that game. By the time I graduated high school, I was a top student. I was a top athlete. I got into every college I applied to. I got into all the Ivy League schools. Ended up going to Stanford and competing on 2 NCAA championship swimming teams there as a bench warmer. I was training with like Olympic champions and gold medalists, world record holders, and the like.
But you chose to go to Stanford because that's where the best were.
Best school, best swimming program at the time.
You chose that over Harvard.
I chose it over Harvard.
And you got seduced with California as well.
I did, yeah. I got seduced by California. So my point being that I was somebody who had quite a bit of promise as a young person. Then comes the introduction to alcohol, which started out really fun, and I had a great time. I was always somebody who was insecure and had trouble making friends. I was very socially awkward, and alcohol really helped me. It helped me kind of get comfortable with myself, and suddenly I could go to a party and crack a joke and talk to a girl, which was all very new to me. But
you had your first drink at 18 at a college campus, and your family didn't have a history of drinking.
No.
Yeah.
No, I grew up 2 loving parents, still married, so it wasn't a function of being around alcoholism growing up.
Right, and it found that now the introverted, awkward Rich was now in your mind the life of the party.
Yeah, suddenly social animal, the last guy to leave the party, and all the kind of stuff that happens when that like kind of switch gets flicked and the relationship with alcohol goes from something that's fun to something that is quickly becoming dark.
How long did that take to happen?
It took a couple years, but there were plenty of incomprehensibly demoralizing scenarios that I found myself in very early on, and they just became progressively worse and worse and worse. And the denial mechanism gets dialed up, so you're able to like justify it or slough it off. But it was pretty clear to me pretty early on in my unconscious mind that I had a very unhealthy relationship with this substance, and that it was likely to be causing me increasingly more dramatic problems if I continued to pursue it. But pursue it I did. For 15 years, I kind of had this career as a professional alcoholic. I moved to New York City, and that's like Disneyland for alcoholics.
Yeah,
and that's where it really kicked in, and
I never thought of that, but you say that in your book, and you're so right.
And you don't have to drive, all that kind of stuff. So
and it's just everywhere. There's a bar open any time of the day.
All the time.
Every flavor you want. It's just there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this went on for many years. Meanwhile, I was able to still sort of function. I got into law school. I was able to get through law school somehow. I don't know how, and get a good job at a good law firm in Los Angeles. But I was leading this kind of double life, and it was only it was a ticking time bomb. It was only a matter of time before these worlds were going to collide and disaster was going to ensue. And that's certainly what happened. Ultimately, alcohol brought me to my knees. At the end, it was really sad and pathetic. There was nothing romantic or rock and roll or sexy about it. It was just kind of pathetic, frankly.
Have you seen the movie Leaving Las Vegas?
Of course.
I
remember vividly seeing that movie. It must have been, what year was that? Mid-90s, early 90s, 94.
Yeah.
I went with a friend who is not an alcoholic, and he was horrified. And I was like, oh, I get it. He's just trying to have a good time. Like, I was with him the whole way. Like, I understood where he was at,
Right, in the suitcase full of alcohol.
Yeah.
You knew what that's like. And
yeah.
I know, because I know as well, like, is there going to be enough alcohol? Do I need to bring an extra bottle?
For sure.
So you saw that movie differently than other people.
Yeah, for sure.
And for you, it got bad. It was like DUIs, and even when you finally checked in, they were like, wow, you're in a pretty bad state. DUIs,
car crash. I got 2 DUIs in a 2-month period, 0.27, 0.29, like really high blood alcohol. Rear-ended an elderly woman and injured her. Lots of scowling judges. I was facing jail time. you know, at the very end, I was the guy who started the day with a vodka tonic in the shower and, you know, a tall boy between my legs as I drove to work, and sneaking drinks throughout the day and hiding my empties, and, you know, just looking forward to that oblivion, that blackout, you know, once work was over. And weekends were just gone, you know, gone. And then that kind of 2-day period of trying to come back to life with the shaking and the sweating and the inability to sleep, like, it was a job. You know, it was a job, and it took its toll on me. And then I had that moment that you hear with people in recovery, you know, that epiphany, that reckoning moment where I woke up one day hungover, and it wasn't that different than so many other days, but I suddenly just was blessed with the willingness to like face this in a way that I hadn't been courageous enough previously. To really own what was going on and to do something about it, you know, that moment of clarity.
You ever think that day might not have happened?
Oh, I mean, every day I think about that. Every day I think about that.
I mean, is that like a touch from the divine, or is that inevitable that that day happens? Because there's probably a lot of rich rolls out there who never had that moment and then plowed on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when the elevator's going down, at some point it meets your pain threshold, you know, and that's different for everybody. I think it's a function of how much pain can you tolerate before you're actually willing to do something about it, where the fear of the unknown is trumped by the fear of your current situation. You know, for me, pain has really only been the only true motivator of getting me to change any of my errant ways. And the truth is, change is available to all of us all the time. We just have to make a choice and a decision. It's just that pain makes it easier to make that choice.
And that's the quote unquote rock bottom, kind of when
Yeah.
that inflection point where, okay, now I have to do something.
Yeah.
I think John said there's rock bottom, he said, but then you can actually go lower.
You
down where
can,
the
there's
maggots
always
are.
lower. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
always lower.
Yeah.
There's always lower. And you hear that in the recovery community, you know, people that are still struggling, they'll say, well, you know, I've never gotten a DUI, or, you know, I've never been fired, or, you know, my wife or husband hasn't left me. So you can use those as rationalizations to continue your unhealthy behavior pattern. But the truth is, it's only a matter of time before those things happen, and a matter of whether you're willing to step off before those things happen.
I saw an interview with Sean Penn a while back, and he said something like, he used to drink and party a lot. You know, he said something like, maybe I had to use alcohol to process that at that point, and I couldn't handle it otherwise. And that was a really strange thing to say. And I was wondering, do you even think that you could have been capable at 25 to do what you did later in your 30s?
I think he makes a valid point. You know, I look back on my relationship with alcohol, and I think it would be disingenuous for me to say it's all bad. Like, I think it gave me the ability to navigate a social environment in a way that perhaps I never would have otherwise. So I have some gratitude for that.
It's a high level of forgiveness.
Yeah, but it turns on you, you know. Yeah. And I don't regret, you know, I don't regret anything that has happened. All of those experiences have made me who I am today. So I wouldn't change anything. You know, certainly it's not fun to endure that kind of suffering, but I think it's made me a stronger person ultimately. Yeah.
What was that rehab experience like? Because you went into a pretty serious place for quite a amount of time. I mean, not a lot of alcoholics would do something like that.
I went to a treatment center in rural Oregon outside Portland. And at the time I remember, I'm just gonna go here for a couple weeks. I'm gonna spin dry, you know, get back to my super important career. You know I gotta sort some things out, but like, you know, I got things to do. And when I arrived there, I realized the gravity of my situation. I was like, I'm in a mental institution. You know, I think I'm this smart guy, but the truth is, the decisions that I'd made about how to live my life had culminated in me arriving in this place. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I realized, like, I better make the most of this because I don't ever want to come back to a place like this. And I made a decision to really do everything they told me to do, to like take all of my questioning or doubt out of the equation and just show up and have the willingness to take direction. And I started sharing about how I was actually living for the very first time with the groups and with the counselors. And I remember one counselor, after I'd been there a week or so, pulled me aside and he goes, Rich, you know, you have a case of alcoholism that we generally only see in like 65-year-old lifelong drinkers. And if you don't make this your number one priority, you know, you're probably going to die. And he wasn't being overly dramatic about it, but he wanted me to really understand what was actually happening. And I was able to hear that. And
was that your physiology or was that your mental state?
I don't know.
Okay.
You can spend a lot of time like thinking, analyzing, why am I an alcoholic? What led me here? Ultimately, I don't find that to be that fruitful or helpful in terms of how to move forward. I try to focus on the solution and how to live today. But I think hearing that made me realize, like, oh, this is serious, you know, and I better take this seriously. So I ended up staying in that rehab for 100 days.
By choice.
Yeah, by choice. It's a long time to be in rehab.
It is.
You know, yeah.
And it wasn't a nice place.
I mean, it wasn't like a fancy resort-like experience, but it wasn't boot camp either, you know.
And why stay for that long?
I needed to completely overhaul how I was living from top to bottom. And I needed a new toolbox for that. I needed to learn new tools for how to treat myself and how to be in the world. You know, I needed to develop a spiritual relationship with myself and with something greater than myself, which was a brand new experience for me.
I know your parents kind of gave you an ultimatum even before you checked in and said, look, we don't want anything to do with you anymore, because you were probably drunk whenever they were around and they saw the destruction. And I know they even kind of started seeing their own organization, you know, to kind of deal with some of that trauma. And, you know, with my story with Iron Mind, when I went back to New York City, I ended up meeting some people that did the same thing to me, basically walked away from me when I was at my lowest point. And for me, that was one of the reasons I actually hit the bottom. And I was just wondering if you ever thought that way about your parents, as in thanked them for pushing you away. And is that always the best thing that people should do if they're around an addictive person?
I don't know if it's always the best thing. I mean, I think what happened to me, and it sounds like what happened to you, those are acts of great compassion. You know, those are acts of love. And you need to hear the truth. You know, that's what snaps you out of the denial. When you realize that the people you care about the most are no longer on your side, I think that allows you to kind of perceive your reality a little bit differently. It really kind of cracks the veneer of how you're perceiving your reality. So yeah, I think it was a great act. It wasn't fun and it felt horrible, but ultimately it was a great catalyst that helped me get into recovery. And I think it's important, you know, for people that are watching or listening, that if you know somebody, if someone close to you is suffering, the first thing you have to understand is it's very difficult to help somebody who doesn't want help, and you have to take care of yourself first. And part of that is disengaging from the codependent behavior that contributes to the acceleration of that disease. And part of disconnecting from that kind of codependent relationship is letting that person know, like, hey, I love you. When you're ready to get well, I'm here for you 110%. But until then, I can't participate in your life the way that you're living right now. And that can be effective. It was in my case, at least.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I could, even fairly soon after, I could see that they were making the right call. You know, when you have someone going down those depths of spiraling down, you just need to get the hell away from that before you get taken down with it. And it's funny, I talked to them later and they said, Brian, I'm just so happy you're okay. It was really emotional, because like they were actually, you think they're abandoning you, but they were trying to love you,
right?
And you weren't allowing them to, and until you made the choice, it was pointless.
So when that happened to you, did you get angry? What was your reaction?
You know, I think with me, it was just like, I think since a kid, I was kind of like expecting people to let me down. And so for me, maybe it was just a confirmation that I am all alone and fuck them all and that. So I don't think I ever was like, oh, I can't believe she left me. I think I saw that it made sense, and I think it helped in me hitting my bottom, you know, a few months later and taking some action. So, and then after that, it was just so much pain and shame that I never wanted to contact him until this whole thing happened. You know? But yeah, I wasn't pointing the finger. It was definitely nuance what was happening there. But those were clear signals that you're screwing up, because you can run the own narrative in your head and justify everything and tell yourself you're doing X, Y, and Z.
Of course, yeah.
But it's those people, and it's the great. And I actually thanked them, like in a weird 12-step way, which I don't even know the 12 steps. But I was like, thank you for doing that to me, because they're the ones that, you know, gave me those signals. So, what was it like coming out of that 100 days? Because that's got to be a weird situation. You're probably very fragile, and
yeah, I had to make my way back into the world very gingerly. You're living in this protective womb where it's all about personal growth and discovery, and then you're just back into your life again. And you have to then return to that place of work and reconnecting with your friends and your family after having this experience. It's disorienting. So it was a challenge, but I was committed to basically, you know, two goals coming out of that experience. One was to create the most solid foundation for sobriety that I possibly could. Like, that was my number one priority. I was very clear on that. That had to come before everything else if this was going to work long term for me. And second to that was repairing all the wreckage that I had created as a result of my drinking and using, which meant learning how to become a productive, responsible member of society again, learning how to show up when you said you were going to show up, to tell the truth, to look people in the eye, you know, all of that stuff that when you're in your disease eludes you, right? And so I was successful in that. You know, I was really committed. I was going to like 2 meetings a day and just very active in the recovery community, showing up for work. You know, I was clear, like, listen, maybe corporate law isn't for me, but my firm supported me when I went to treatment, and I felt the right thing to do was return and work there at least as long as I was away. And so I stayed in that environment for another year. Ultimately ended up leaving that and starting my own little practice. But, you know, fast forwarding to 39.
And you went celibate for a year as well. You were really
I
serious.
did, yeah, I did. You did your research, yeah. I went celibate for a year. Well, when I was leaving treatment, one of the counselors said, look, I think it would be a really good idea if you didn't date anybody for a while. Like, my relationship with alcohol was so intricately intertwined with my relationship with women. Like, it was a very like, I would just associate going out, partying or whatever, talking to women, talking to girls with alcohol. And I needed to relearn how to be social with the opposite sex without a mind-altering substance. And to really redefine how I related to women for myself and my own personal growth. So yeah, so I committed to 1 year of total celibacy and not dating, which I would say, it sounds daunting, but it was one of the most empowering things I ever did. I learned so much about myself, because when you remove that from your daily equation, it clears up so much energy and creates so much clarity, and that sort of focus turns inward, and you go on this kind of personal inward journey. And I learned a lot about myself and what makes me tick. And fundamentally, I think that allowed me to have a healthy relationship with a woman for the very first time. You know, so I met my wife right on the cusp, the very end of that 1 year experience, and we've been together ever since.
Wow.
Yeah. The first person that I dated in sobriety is now my wife and the mother of my children. And 15 years later, 20 years later.
Wow, and you guys have done these great books together, et cetera. Was your self-esteem really low? Like, were you kind of the shell of a man, or did you kind of get back up to speed fairly quick?
My self-esteem was very low. I had a lot of shame, a lot of insecure. I mean, I'd always been insecure, always self-conscious, And alcohol allows you to overcome that, right? You remove alcohol, that's not the solution. Alcohol is the cure. Like that's the answer to the problem. You remove and then it's not, it turns on you. But when you remove the drugs and the alcohol, then you're left with yourself. And that's where the real work begins. So yeah, I had to go on this journey of trying to repair all of that, all of those character defects. I'm still, it's an ongoing battle. I still think I'm a pretty insecure person. I'm a people pleaser. I always defer to what everybody else wants to do. I have a hard time standing up for myself, and it's just an ongoing process of trying to become better every day. And some days I do well at it, and other days I don't.
And the recovery in the 12-step program was very important in the early times. Do you still use those techniques and do the meetings thing? Or?
Yeah, that's still my number one priority, and I'm a very active member of that community in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Yeah,
Talk
it's still
about it
super
much.
important. Well, you're not supposed to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that how that works?
There's a tradition against being explicit about that in press, radio, and film. So I don't talk about that in that way, but yeah, it's the number one thing that I do. It's the most important thing in my life to this day.
And it's probably the number one most effective way for most people to beat something like this.
Yeah, I think it works. And it's interesting, every couple years somebody will make a splash with some new way of getting sober or staying sober. And that's fine. I think we should always be innovating and looking at ways of treating addiction. I just know that this is what works for me. I've seen miracles happen in other people's lives, and I believe in it wholeheartedly. It's incredibly powerful and profound. The impact that this program has had in my life, and a lot of people that I'm close with.
Okay, so 32-ish, you meet Julie, your wife now, and the story could be "and happily ever after."
Mm-hmm.
And what changed that?
A bunch of things. Well, let's see where to begin with this. From 32 to 39, it was all about trying to become successful in my professional career. But I became a workaholic. A lot of my addictive, obsessive personality traits got transferred into my profession. And as a result of that, I became quite unwell. I was 50 pounds overweight, sort of semi-depressed, lethargic, never morbidly obese or anything like that, but just kind of this guy sliding into middle age, just sort of tolerating life. I love my wife, we were building a family. From the outside looking in, everything looked fantastic, but on the inside there was this growing seed of discontent, like almost this existential crisis about these choices that I had made about my professional career. And that all kind of came to a head shortly before I turned 40, when this existential crisis kind of collided with my poor health and manifested in a bit of a health scare when I was walking up a simple flight of stairs to go to bed one night and had to pause. Here I was, this former world-ranked swimmer who had swum at Stanford, and I would still look in the mirror and think that that was the guy being reflected back at me, and couldn't see the reality of my current condition, which is that I hadn't been taking care of myself. I hadn't exercised in as long as I could remember. I'd been subsisting on a fast food diet on a daily basis for the better part of my adult life. And when you're young, you can kind of get away with a lot of that stuff, but it catches up to you. And it caught up to me on this staircase where, I had to pause. I was bent over. I had tightness in my chest and started dripping sweat on my brow. And it scared me. It scared me. Heart disease runs in my family. My grandfather had been a champion swimmer, captain of the University of Michigan swim team in 1929, was an Olympic hopeful, an American record holder, never smoked, was never overweight, but died of a heart attack at 54. And my mom would always say, you gotta be careful. I'm named after him. I look like him. She's like, you gotta be careful. But when you're young, it's just in one ear and out the other. You don't really listen. You don't heed that. But in that moment, it kind of all became very crystal clear to me that I needed to change how I was living. And I think I was able to recognize the power of that moment because in many ways it was so similar to that day that I decided to go to treatment. You know, you have these moments in time that I think that are visited upon all of us in different ways, that if we have enough awareness, really hold the power to transform our lives, if we can recognize them when they're happening. And because of that experience of waking up and deciding to go to treatment, I realized once again on this staircase that this was just like that. And if I could summon the courage, the wherewithal to take some pretty swift action, that perhaps this provided me with another opportunity to change the conditions of my daily life. And it did, you know, it did. I was able to harness the fear that I experienced, the pain that I experienced in that moment, to change my relationship with food and ultimately my relationship with fitness and then my professional career. It sort of set in motion this domino effect, this cascading effect that has led me to the very moment where I get to sit here with you today. But it really all began, you know, on that staircase.
Do you ever wonder about that moment if it hadn't have happened? You know,
Oh,
because
yeah.
you could argue that alcoholism would have come to some type of rock bottom, but that's a weird moment where I read it in your book and a lot of people would have ignored it and gone to bed, you know? And maybe it would have come up 5 years later, or
Right.
maybe you would have died, you know? Do you ever think, or?
Yeah, I mean, I could have had a heart attack, or I could have just said, you know what, I should probably eat better. You know, well, what does that mean? It's such a vague statement. You should probably go to the gym, you know. What does that mean? And maybe I would have for a little bit, but I would have quickly reverted back to my old habits. And I think my experience in sobriety taught me that if you want to make a change, you have to be decisive, and you have to establish some very well-defined action steps that will then create momentum and ultimately shift your trajectory.
Okay, so we can thank some of the structure
Of course. Oh,
that
yeah,
for
yeah,
this
yeah,
whole
yeah.
next plan.
Yeah.
Fascinating how
Yeah.
you can be grateful to the alcohol again.
Yeah, well, I think it's like when you're an if you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, you are attracted to the extreme, right? And I've learned how to kind of harness that and channel it in healthier directions. So I can take that obsessive nature that perhaps I have, and in that moment on the staircase go, all right, well, let's move that over here and just place that keenly upon changing my relationship with food.
And the thing about alcoholics and drug addicts is that they work so hard every day to function, lie, hide.
It's a lot of work.
You wake up hungover and you push through it and you do this.
You'll
and
do anything that day to make sure that you're going to get that fix.
Yeah, it's this weird, relentless outlier that, focused correctly, can do things that most other people wouldn't do. All right, and so then the plants come in. Now, you know, that wasn't an obvious choice. You know, how did that happen for you?
So what happened was, well, the first thing I did was I realized I needed to go to treatment for food. So I looked at it through the lens of my experience of getting sober and thought, well, what can I do to have a similar experience that's going to really shake things up in terms of how I connect with what I have to put in my mouth every day. So the first thing I did was a 7-day like vegetable juice cleanse detox thing, which my wife helped me out with. And you know, I'd never gone a single day in my entire life without eating solid food. And it had nothing to do with the science of detoxing my body. It just seemed really hard, you know? And it seemed like the closest thing that I could conjure that would be similar to detoxing, like being in detox like the first couple days of treatment where you're just getting off drugs and alcohol. So I thought, I'm gonna do that for food. And it was very similar to that. You know,
Really?
First couple days lying on a couch, like groaning and having no energy. It was just like getting off drugs. But then the fog clears.
What was that, a sugar addiction coming off, or?
It was caffeine, it was just junk food, it was sugar, it was all of it, you know? And then going to just basically drinking vegetable juice and like this beet broth and, you know, like literally almost nothing. But then the fog starts to clear. And at the end of that week, I felt incredible. I had this insane resurgence of vitality and energy that I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. And that was profound because it taught me that food really is medicine in certain regards, that by making a simple change, you can so drastically alter your experience.